Welcome to another edition of Mailbag. Now, Mailbag is a feature of the channel where I discuss questions and comments that you guys leave on my channel. Some of them I can answer, some of them I can't, and some of the comments I feel should be shared with you. But right now, into the first Mailbag item of this session. Remember, like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Go over to Instagram and follow me there. Go over to Facebook, follow me there. That's where the normal notices are. And consider becoming a Patreon. And this next one's from Tahiro 1121. And it's in response to another one. It's another sort of fairly long message. A video I did, and I remember doing this because it was earlier this year. What happened to the rack mount version? A video I did in April 2021, and I still, I can see where things have gone. But it was really interesting, different people's take on the whole rack mount thing. And Tahiro writes, I think that the disappearance of the rack mount units is mostly due to the emergence of the VST. I say this because some big producers back in the day who heavily depended on certain series of synthesizers, say the Roland JDs for example, owned like 5 JD 990s, all in a rack and wired controlled to and from a PC/Mac, typically through eMagic Uniator 8 with Mac and Logic as the DAW. Here I am talking about Dasaki Asukuru. I'm assuming that's a Japanese producer. Back when this was kind of practice, was so popular among such producers, it was an expensive option, but the only way for most to get effectively simplified the workflow and save time while layering tracks safely, while having hardware synth without keyboard. In a studio, a number of audio tracks, they would appear in one project, was and is still is very intuitive. There is always some hard work involved of such synth owners having to make sure that every aspect of MIDI audio routing is done right. It's a very, very true statement, that. And I said, MIDI, while relatively simple, still confuses the nuts out of a lot of people, and I'll be brutally honest with that. And all USB just doesn't add to the simplification of it. It actually makes the whole environment far more complex because it's bidirectional. Anyway, we move on. VSTi makes it easier, cheaper to have multiple instances of the same synth running with different patches simultaneously, and this has been made possible thanks to the massive improvements in computation power that made today's PC Mac possible. I mean, look at Ben Boma and ask yourself what makes his style of performance possible. By the way, I was born in 1986. Well, I got 16 years on you, which means I was only a toddler or a teenager in those years when many of the famous rack mount units were newly introduced into the market. I could not have possibly brought them new. Today I own a JV280, a D110, an X5DR, a JP8000 CS1X, and we'll be receiving a TX81Z and an MR1 in coming days. Do you know what? That is a really, really good stock studio setup. You can't go wrong with the stock sounds that you're going to get with that group of instruments. It certainly is intuitive and so much fun for me to fiddle with them, and that's what turns me into a synth hoarder. But the fiddle will often take away too much time to get to spend less time on the DAW than I wish I could. I face less of these issues with the VST, like Serum, Aspire, and Slytherin 1. And half the fun is fiddling. And I'm going to leave it at that. All right? Half the fun is fiddling. If you are not making your money through music then don't be afraid to fiddle, because that's how you learn your instrument. If you're making your music through, making your money through music, then there's normally pressure to produce. That's kind of what I'm getting at. I am writing the following as a side note, hence the in-self reply format. As a solution to time-consuming fiddle with, I've now connected two Roland A880s on a Mark of the Unicorn MIDI Express 21 interface, one for in and one for out. So I won't even have to physically unplug, reroute any cables when receiving SysX, which I prefer to do from a separate PC running Linux. I just do not see it easy enough to find a trustworthy, simple SMF sequencer written for Windows, and it bothers me because some patches presets are only available in the .mid format. For audio, I will least likely be using a patch bay or hardware effects, although I might change my mind on this later, just simply because I do not like the idea of output signals from synths travelling meters or distance in analog. It just doesn't sit well in my mind. I'm also writing some Maxima Live devices to make it possible to remote control the above mentioned synths, so they can be treated the same way as I would treat Seren, Spire or Slytherin. So that is one user's experience of why the racks don't exist anymore and how he uses his studio. I responded as follows. It's always great to hear how other people execute their workflow. I have been in studios from the late 80s all the way through to the mid 2000s where they had racks of equipment purely because the compute was too expensive. And I kind of mean that, in the good old days, we now have moved and we kind of expect everybody to be recording it on a DAW. But that's only a recent, the last 10 years or so where that's actually been possible at this level. Even sort of large studios didn't really convert to digital audio. We started converting mid-90s, I suppose. But, a lot of them are still using analog tape well into the 2000s. But it was an expensive process, disk-based compute was expensive. And you've made the issue is made really well here. I moved off the Windows base about 7 years ago, which is when I bought my Mac. As even though I had a reasonable specification PC, it just randomly hung mid-project, and that was my issue, because it was doing something. Although I have never been brave enough to go Linux, probably because it's not where my skill set lies. I can find my way around a Linux computer. But actually, when you start actually thinking about programming things in languages for Linux, that's just not where my skill set's like. I like the approach of two 880s. I implemented a MIDI patch bay. It took ages to find the correct product, made by a company on the south coast of the UK. Yeah, they're actually down in Bournemouth, not a million miles away from where I live on the south coast. I implemented a MIDI patch bay, and they started to be stocked by Studio Spares, which actually made it easier to actually get hold of them, because the company down in Bournemouth don't like dealing with you direct. But like you, having all the synths permanently wired back to these panels makes changing routing, for me at least, easy. When the studio's back together, I'll make a video about the wiring configuration as a starting point for others, as many find MIDI very confusing. I like the idea of remote control for the rack and physical synths. I saw a webpage a few years ago where someone was trying to do a similar thing. But of course, now I can't find the webpage. In fact, I've actually had another look for the webpage recently, and I found my notes on the original, when I found the original webpage and what it was called, and the webpage doesn't exist now, and the domain that was hosting it is now up on one of the domain resale sites. So I suspect that page has basically gone to the big webpage in the sky. Anyway, it was a very interesting comment. Food for thought for people who are looking to build their own home studio or even home commercial studio, in that there is a balance between the physical and the virtual, and I'm more physical than virtual. And I say that, and what's really interesting is if you look behind me now, you can see just there, where my hand is sort of running across here, that is a Muse receptor. And I never thought I would get hold of a Muse receptor or buy a Muse receptor. And I've got one, it's sitting there. So, but that's for a project and an experiment that I'm doing. So we'll see how we get on with that.